The personal views expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a very special guest on the show, Temi Odesanya. She is the Director of Responsible AI Automation for Thomson Reuters. Welcome.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm excited to be here.
Well, this is exciting. This is very exciting for me to have you on the show. So you and I were at a conference in Spain. And then once we got back to the US, we had a call and it was great. So I'm really happy that you agreed to actually do this podcast and we were able to connect after that conference.
Same here. I know I was also trying to get to you, but anytime I was able to talk to you, somebody else was still your way. I was like, oof. At least I'm glad we got to connect afterwards. So yeah.
Well, you have a fascinating background. First of all, that conference was amazing that we went to. It was just women leaders at all different types of industries. It was very unique.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was great. I really enjoyed it. So tell me a little bit about your background, your trajectory. You're fascinating. I love what you do in technology. So give me a background of how you got into artificial intelligence automation.
Thank you for the comment. So yeah, I got in over 10 years ago. So it started when my family, we all flew to Netherlands in Leeuwarden to work on managing like electronic LED boards for my family's business. And that's where my interest in technology picked. So, I don't know if you're very familiar with how African businesses run, where the kids have to take over the company, but that hasn't happened in my case. So, but yes, this actually piqued my interest. And I went into software engineering, deploying open source enterprise resource planning tools. Thereafter, I was responsible for managing the web analytics platform back then, which was to provide insight about traffic to our customers as well as vendors and advertisers who displayed on those busy roads. So I was very fascinated with then it was data science before everyone starts to call it AI now. So I was very fascinated with data science, took 2 postgraduate degrees in Canada, as well as got a scholarship to study in Italy for data science too. And since then, I've worn like different hats, been a data scientist, process lead for the banking sector, as well as emerging technology programs. Lee just dabbled in and out of technology. But then my background in privacy started when I was a data scientist and I was analyzing customer data. And I saw the amount of data that we had, both public and internally in the company. And a little part of me was scared, but the other part of me was very fascinated. And over time, like I navigated various industries and having to lead different teams and saw the importance of data governance, particularly when you're having to retain customer data, you're having to consume it, store it, as well as delete it. And compliance then became something I was very fascinated in. And that's how I landed at Thomson Reuters. So yeah.
That is fascinating. I just have been so admiring of you and your career and your path. You're just so curious. I think that's amazing. That's the most important thing that you can be as a technologist for sure. But tell me a little bit about, this is a question that I get asked a lot. And as someone who's a data scientist and has a long career in technology, a lot of people don't understand how privacy and artificial intelligence connects and how it can make privacy more challenging. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Right now, the whole umbrella is responsible AI, but within responsible AI is privacy, risk management, data governance, model governance, legal, and a whole lot. So privacy connects because you're always using people's data, like their sensitive data, the PI data, and also public data. And sometimes we forget that we're actually impacting people's lives. And so when we use that data without the right knowledge, without understanding the limitations and having to consume the bias in the assumptions that you've made about people, the inaccuracies that you've made about people, then at the end of the day, the decision or automated decision making that occurs is faulty. So from a personal experience, I was just sharing with a friend that I was flagged for money laundering. And I keep saying is that I wish I had enough money to be flagged for money laundering. But I was actually flagged for money laundering when I was trying to close on my property from the decision making tool that was used. And as a result, I had to pay fines, but then it's a battle that I couldn't fight and I had to look for another broker. So many times we need to understand that when you're using people's data, whether you're scraping it for data processes or you're using it to build AI models, this is the data that you need to get consent for. This is also the data that you need to be aware of. And this is also the data that you need to protect because that's how people trust you to be able to use your brand.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, harm and safety. I guess those are two issues I want to talk about with
Yeah.
privacy. So the harm, and I think you just talked about it, which was someone taking a model or information and making an incorrect assumption about someone that could possibly be harmful to their, life or liberty or something that they want to do. And then also, to me, another issue that I don't think we talk enough about privacy is that, divulging someone's private information could create a harmful situation for them, like
Mhm.
maybe stalking or different things like that. So just tell me your thoughts about kind of that human impact
Yeah.
of potential privacy violations or some what we're doing with automation and data that can create those problems.
So I don't know if you saw the news about the eye X-ray app. That was very, very fascinating because I saw people were laughing, but then some people were also not scared about it. I'm like, okay, this is a problem. So just for the audience who's not aware of what this app is, the way it works is it works by using the Meta Smart glasses, and it has the ability to it has the ability to take live video streams into Instagram based on what that glasses is, and then the computer program would monitor all of the faces that are there, then search through databases, like public databases, and try to identify whose face that is, as well as their public data online. So going back to your question about the harm of this. So imagine the misuse of this tool and this data leakage that is happening. Although this is not publicly released, this is just to heighten, the conversation about harm. But I still believe that people are starting to use that particular data. They've been news articles about government also using facial recognition tools on the streets and having to profile people. And nowadays, it's heightened cybersecurity issues in which this data is released. So the harm that people can cause with these tools, I don't even think we can fathom what that looks like because as a Christian, it says the heart of man is desperately wicked, and imagine someone taking that information about your children, having to put that online, being able to stalk people. Back when I was still very much actively dating, I would take each person's Twitter account that I made and I would scan for the sentiments because I want to know if you're angry. I want to know if you're a happy person. And these people were not aware that I was doing this, but I was actually doing this with their public information. And I was also able to do it for my friends. And then we will find like their mom's mom, their grandmas and things like that. So at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that you can cause different harms depending on the purpose of what you're trying to use it for. You can start on a noble cause, but then it pivots into something that you can't figure out. And looking at the way news spreads, looking at deep fakes and things like that, we've seen situations where nude pictures of teenagers were exposed and that child committed suicide, right? So it goes across board, whether you're a child, whether you're a parent, whether you're an individual, whether you're a sister or brother, this can actually affect anybody.
I guess the analogy I like to use is like, let's say if you go into a grocery store and you step on the mat that opens the door, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it opens the door for you, but then the next person behind you, they step on the mat and it doesn't open the door for them. And it's like
Mm.
some people have idea where, first of all, this is the issues that we're talking about harm and automated decision making, creating harmful situations, and safety. I feel like some people who are in the technology space, they feel like either they don't think about it, they're like, well, this can't possibly happen to
Yeah.
me, or this has never happened to me, so I'm not really considering the harm. But when you're developing tools and products that's supposed to be used by everybody, you really should be thinking about what those, not just what the
Okay.
benefits of technology, but also the downsides, right?
Yeah, and just to uh probably narrow down that too is it's a complex issue because what is harmful to me culturally might not be harmful to you culturally. So I think organizations need to understand the environments that they play and be willing to adapt to the requirements to ensure that the tools or the product are safe for people. And when it comes to technology, we all know that it's capitalist world, it's all capitalism, and people care about the bottom line at the end of the day. If the metrics change to including responsible practices, as well as, balancing that we're making money or being profitable, I think the world will be a better place. So once we start to encourage and educate people about the need for responsible practices or pursuing their businesses, then people include this. So talk about privacy by design and ethics by design and things like that. It'll automatically be fed into the processes, the data, the thinking, the thoughts around these business cases moving forward.
What is happening in the world right now that's concerning you about artificial intelligence or privacy?
A couple of things. I already shared one, which is the misuse of personal data. But the other thing that I think we chatted about this last time we spoke was the disconnect between advancing technology, the pace at which it's changing, as well as the ability for the privacy laws and regulations to keep up. What I've experienced, and again, this is my personal experience, is I've seen a public calling for policies that are not practical. And I've also seen regulations that are they're definitely not realistic. And I've also seen the flip side where it's practical, it's realistic, it's achievable, and it's novel to have, right? I believe that we all need to come together to educate ourselves on the possibilities of AI, what it can do, in order to come up with what these regulations look like. And the other thing that bothers me, especially as a Black person, is meaningful consent of using my data, right? I'm finding out that my data is being used in different places. And we all know that history is not entirely truthful. And this is being developed into the AI models that everyone interacts with on a daily basis, knowingly or unknowingly. This is something that I believe we still need to keep having that conversation. Also, and I'm also going through it myself, where individuals and professionals have to be aware of the impact of what they do, as well as the legal and technical aspect of how these things can be achieved. So as a responsible AI professional, I need to understand what risk is. I need to understand how to handle risk management. I need to understand what privacy is. I just don't want to be a data scientist and I have no idea of what privacy is. I don't have to be a privacy expert, but I need to be aware of what that is and how I need to include it in my project, in my process. And this is not solely the responsibility of a technical team, but as an organization, we need to start seeing cross-pollination of skills and cross-functional teams working on data science project as a whole. Sense me.
I agree with that. So I think companies do need to change instead of having people, obviously, people will have siloed types of work, but when it comes to data and how data flows work within an organization, there needs to
Yeah,
be more multidisciplinary focus there and
yeah,
more data sharing and more knowledge sharing
I
amongst
agree.
those groups because it's hard to protect data if you only know a certain, you only know a little bit about why companies are handling data and what they're doing with data. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts? And AI, and in terms of how the data flows within organizations, because it's hard to, I think it's impossible to handle it if everyone's in kind of their own silo and they're not
I
really
agree.
thinking across the organization and how that data flows and why it flows in those ways. And then
Yeah.
having those people those champions within those silos so that
Yeah.
they know, hey, we're handling data or we're doing something new that we wouldn't do
Yeah.
before. And here's, the concern that I have and
Yeah.
how you can partner with these data teams on those issues. I want your thoughts. You had mentioned privacy by design. And I guess I'm gonna throw out something. Maybe it's like ethics by design or responsible AI by design. I
Yeah.
I think that, especially when we talk about privacy, a lot of people talk about laws and regulation, which is, nothing wrong with that. But I feel
Yeah.
like we need more foundational guardrails around how we
Yes.
handle data
Yeah.
that regulation can't really handle, right? Because regulation typically, especially in the US, regulations typically don't happen until something bad happens, right? So something bad happens, like, oh, let's create Johnny's law. Oh my God, what happened to Johnny, right? I think being able, companies need to have more foundational ways to prevent issues before they become legal issues.
Yeah.
But I want your thoughts on that.
So everybody says data is the new oil, right? And right now, everyone is talking about AI. And I think we're not really talking about data and data governance first as a foundation before building AI tools or AI models. You're very right. We need to look at data governance as a practice first. So, data minimization, data retention, data quality, all of those things need to be addressed. Now, you can, depending on the how big your organization is, you might not be able to boil the ocean, but at least you can start with your critical data elements, which is, data that brings in financial rewards or, something very important to your company, however you define it. Once those things or those metrics, those qualities are addressed, then that comes, I would say, responsible AI by design. So before I create a model, if I fill out the data impact assessment, I'll say assessment that contains a lot of questions around like data governance, model governance, privacy, IP, things like that, risk and the rest. Once those things are filled and the right compliance team addresses it and works with the business function to define how to balance the project with responsible practices, then it is starting to develop the models. And before you deploy these models, it's having like the right documentation and having the right model risk assessment done, the right monitoring plan, and then, having to having to having to answer to questions about, things like consent, having to look at anonymization of data in your models before you actually deploy this out, whether you're using a third-party tool or you're building an internal tool, these things have been checked as a process, as a guardrail. And better still, some of these controls can be integrated into your model registry or wherever you build your model, your data. So it's not a manual process done every time. This data is being synced and streamlined across systems. And then that way, it becomes natural for people. It's innate for people to follow these rules. So I believe that as organizations start to enforce and emphasize the need that these practices before models are developed, like having the right sandbox for people to play with, right, to implement some of these things before they go to production will be helpful. Bringing in the right people will be helpful. Having these conversations when those use cases are being developed or being even thought of is a way to, I'll say, imprint this into the culture is one way I recommend like companies start to follow.
Yeah.
So
I feel like we need to change from the big data era. Remember the big data era where we're like, let's collect as much as possible because data is so valuable. And
yeah,
what a lot of companies ended up with a lot of tech debt as a result of that, and then a lot of garbage that they couldn't do anything with, right?
yeah,
So if you're collecting data, you don't know what it's collected for, you may not be able to get the right insights that you need or that you want to get. So
yeah,
thinking being more circumspect about what data that you actually have and not trying to throw everything into a bucket and hoping, something comes out right. I mean, my analogy is like you wouldn't take everything in your refrigerator and throw it into a pot and try to make a meal, right?
That's
So,
right. That's right. And back to your point, there's the rise of like test data management tools where you don't actually have to start collecting all of this data to validate your use case. You can create synthetic data to validate your use case, at least to see what type of data points you need if you don't have it, and then determine how you need to get that. So I think that's something that companies need to start looking at. Like, you don't have to like scrape people's data online. Or another thing that we talked about where we're seeing, I think LinkedIn was guilty of this, having to use people's posts to train AI models. And who would have thought they were collecting all of those data? But I'm sure they just, maybe this is me just giving a scenario. Maybe they're like, let's script everything off LinkedIn, put it in our backup. And then when we need it, we just go get it out. So yeah, you're right. You have to be strategic on what data points you need, why you need it, and what you need it for.
just to dovetail on your LinkedIn analogy, and actually, I'll throw another one in with a different industry, which is automobiles. So, General Motors had a situation where they were collecting people's data, and the people didn't feel like they really understood why their data was being collected, and they were
Mm,
getting their insurance canceled and different things like that. And it was a huge consumer backlash where GM decided they wanted to stop sending data to a certain, company. I think there's like a lawsuit happening now in Texas or something about that. But I think the thing that we're seeing now is that I think consumers are waking up
hmm.
to these issues and they're really, lashing out. 'Cause they're like, hey, I didn't, even
Consent to
though,
this.
right, even right, they didn't consent, right? So even, LinkedIn or GM, they
Yeah.
haven't done anything maybe legally wrong, right? Maybe they followed the law or maybe they took advantage of places where there are gaps in the law. But the fact of the
Yeah.
matter is consumers are really upset.
Aware.
And so being able to really communicate this in ways that consumers really understand and give them choice, I think is going to be important in the future because if consumers don't trust you, they're not going to give you good data, right?
Yeah, and going back to your point, one of the reasons I like Apple for, so I'm taking, I think I shared with you, I'm taking the IPPC IPM course now. I've been busy, so I've reduced the pace, but we were asked to read the Apple's privacy policy, and then I discovered that Apple actually has this feature you can check out on your iPhone that tells you how many people, which apps are using your data and how many times they picked it. And so, a funny story, I always use Google Maps, but then this day it was raining and it was crappy. So I opened, was it Waze? I opened or Lyft? I can't recall the app, but I think it was Waze. I opened Waze and I immediately closed it. Like immediately, I didn't use it. Tell me why 48 hours later, I was seeing that Waze had pinged my location multiple times. And I'm like, "What? I didn't even use the app, right?" So this actually led me to like going through all my apps and like turn off location, turn off the services, things like that. I think again, this example goes back to your point of how a company is using data without even needing to justify it legally. Like ethically, are you supposed to use that data? Are you following the principles that you set forth by your organization? What are the norms, that you set forth in your organization? And are people or are your employees adhering to that? Because it's a different thing to have it, and it's a different thing for people not to follow it. So yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about ethics. So, ethics is interesting
Yeah.
because ethics, in my view, is sort of not legal, right? It's kind of your guidelines, your morals, your
Hmm.
values, things like
Hmm.
that. And not all laws are ethical either. Just throw that out there.
I agree.
But how do you go about communicating the importance of ethics when organizations want to use AI?
Oof, okay. So before you decide to do business with anybody, you have to understand what their values are, right? So for me, before I even develop a friendship with anybody or buy a tool, or do anything, it's like, okay, what values do I tie to this tool, and what benefit does it bring me? What does it serve me? So going back to your question for organizations is, as a company, what's our mission? What's our vision? Like, what's our brand identity? What's principles? Because mission doesn't, some people's mission might contradict the use cases, right? And vice versa. So a good example is creating war robots. For NASA, that might align to their mission. But for, I say, a health company having to create war robots, it's like that goes against your mission and your values and everything, right? So I always ask, what's your mission? What's your values? What are your principles? How do you want to do business? What is your identity? And how does your use case align to that first? What are your customers' expectations? Thereafter, what does the law say? So there are times where you have to forego a feature because of what the regulation says, or there are times you have to forego a feature because of what your mission and your brand stands for, right? So starting on that note, and once we're able to get that out of the way, is then saying, okay, for every use case, here are the criteria that matter to us. Here's a risk we're willing to accept that again ties back to our vision and mission, and here's how we want to deploy it. So, when you look at success metrics too, how does that tie back to what we stand for as a company? All right. So before I, you know, even so, I give an example. There is a particular educational company where one of the executive approached me and said that they use facial recognition during exams to identify who's cheating and who's not cheating. And they also use their data to recommend educational courses and materials. And at the end of the day, when they try to scale in certain regions, they couldn't because the regulations were against it. And I told them, I said, well, in Africa, for example, I haven't seen a strong regulation on facial recognition. In Europe, I've seen one. Fine, we need to change your business model. However, do we really need facial recognition for some use cases that you're selling, right? Are you really sure that that feature is the most prominent feature that can give you money, or are there ways to go about having to assess if people are cheating or not? Or do we even need to change your business model for certain types of product in that market, right? So these are conversations that I would say needs to be had. It's sometimes it can be complex, but if you start from the foundation of why you exist and why you're doing business, then that would help. And there's some founders who have unethical practices, and we see them share those online. So you should expect that if you're going to create product, you're going to work on project for that type of company, you're going to have to do unethical things. And that's up to you to decide if you want to work on that or if you don't want to work on that. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad to see there's more conversation around responsible AI and ethics because I don't know how you feel, but I feel as though you can innovate without hurting people. So I don't think trying to create safety or safe space for people will stop innovation. I don't know. That's just my thought. What do you think?
So there, so I'm taking a Stanford live class. It's on ethical AI. And there was a use case about that, which is very popular, the Omela use case, where I don't know if you're familiar with it, where society striving, everybody's joyful, but the prosperity of that society depends on the suffering of a child. And the question was, if you feed that child, the society is going to be affected. So some people were okay. Some people acted like they didn't know why. Some people left the community because they couldn't bear to see that child suffering. And so the conversation around that use case was, do you think this is fair? And how would you address that? And I said, this is real life. This is life right now, right? There are technologies you can deploy that would not have any consequence. So, for example, the technology, the purpose of a technology might not have any consequence. However, the evolution of that technology might then bring consequences later. So, good example is think of the case management system or medical record, right? I'm collecting all your medical records for the purpose of storing it for you and for it to be accessed by medical professionals. Now, the purpose is not harmful. However, when it now comes to innovating that feature to make it personalized, then you start to hear things like, now I'm using that data. And in using that data, the risk such as leakage of that information, the risk around the bias, or the even risk around inaccuracies, when handling that data. So back to you, yes, you can deploy a technology without affecting people. However, it doesn't hold true for all types of technology, all types of use case where there won't be risk. And if those risks materializes, they become issues, and those issues have consequences. So it's a very, very complex, complex use case or complex discussion because, like I said, what is harmful to me might not be harmful to you. So another quick example is we cannot eat healthy food, but is that food really healthy for you? Right. So again, it depends on how the use case is used, where it's used, who is using it. It might not be harmful, but depends on the purpose, then it becomes harmful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy. I hadn't heard that one before. Probably use it. I'm gonna steal it from you. I'll give you credit for it, of course.
So, I picked some from you too. So yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So if it were the world according to you, Timmy, and we did everything that you said, what would be your wish for privacy or artificial intelligence anywhere in the world, whether that be regulation,
hmm
human behavior, or technology?
So a couple, a couple wishes by horses, right? One is better accountability and protection of vulnerable groups, especially kids, especially minorities. I think for everybody, we should all feel protected, particularly heightened safeguards for our sensitive data. I don't want my health records spilling out in public, right? I don't want my divorce, for example, I go through divorce and I'm see my divorce papers online, right? Or my genetic data being leaked online. People need to feel protected. People need to build trust. I am hoping that trust will become the future oil if it's not currently the new oil, right? Instead of just data. And the other thing is, personally, I've become more aware of what I share to the public. So where I go, what I eat, where I visit, having to be more sensitive on what I post so that I don't put myself as a target for people is something that I want everyone to be aware of. And then lastly, it is being able to actually protect people when the data is leaked online. Because I've seen situations where somebody's data gets leaked and the whole world comes crashing on that person because the judgments are flowing. The person didn't purposely release their records, but it's online. We have to address why it's online, not criticize the person for what they did in the closet that is online, right? So that's something I'm hoping that will play out in the future, as well as very realistic regulations that protect everybody. Everybody is something I'm looking forward to, and organizations having to employ responsible practices when defining use cases or building products. So yeah.
Those are all good wishes. Those are all great wishes.
Well, if wishes were awesome, we're going to see in the future what happens.
Definitely. Well, thank you
How
so much.
about you, though? I didn't hear from
One wish,
you.
one wish. Oh,
Yes, tell
you're
me.
turning the tables on me now.
I
Uh,
am.
I want to see privacy as a fundamental human right in the US, and it is not
Mhm.
yet. And I think that will close some of the gaps that we see between
Agree.
the human versus consumer type of issue, where some companies feel like, well, I can do something harmful to you because you're not my consumer, right? You don't consume my
Hmm.
product, so I don't really
Hmm.
care about your data. So I think that's a huge gap. And
Yeah.
then I want companies that are doing these more emerging technologies. They are very good at touting the benefits, but they don't really talk a lot about the
Risk.
downsides. So,
Yeah.
talk balancing what those benefits are versus the risk and not having it be like, oh, you're trying to stop innovation. I think, for example, with the automobile industry, the fact that we have stoplights and stop signs and
Hmm.
painting on the
Guardrails.
guardrails, that did not stop the innovation in the automobile industry, right? And
I
so
agree.
I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about regulation. We're not talking about you can't do certain innovation. We're saying do it in a way that actually helps people and not
Yeah.
harm people. And so that's
Yeah.
my goal.
Yeah. Yeah. I do agree with you, and I'm hoping that becomes true. It's
Yeah.
legal. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This is great, as I expected. It's great
Yeah.
to actually get your point of view, and I loved what you're doing, and I'm happy to hopefully we can find ways to collaborate in the future.
I can't wait though. But thank you for inviting me here.
Yeah.
This has been good. I've also like reflected on some of the things that I've said. I'm also going to listen to it because I have to uphold what I practice too. So yeah, this is great.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you, Debbie.
You're
Have a
welcome.
great day.
Okay.